there are questions that people have asked the past few days on paper. So if you had questions that you asked on paper, then you can come collect the paper with the answer on it, insha'Allah ta'ala.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه.
Start with the name of Allah. We praise Him for the endowments that He bestowed upon us. We ask Allah to raise the rank of our Prophet Muhammad and his believing relatives and noble companions and those who follow him in goodness until the day of judgment, and to protect his nation from that which he fears for them on the day of judgment.
قال المؤلف رحمه الله: وشرطها ما زال الكلام في الجمعة شرطها دخول وقت الظهر، يعني لا تصح لا الخطبة ولا صلاة الجمعة قبل دخول وقت الظهر.
The author, may Allah have mercy upon him, said the conditions of the Friday prayer are. So now we are starting in regards to the conditions for the Friday prayer, the setting in of the dhuhr time. So if the speech or the prayer was done before the Jumu'ah, before the time of al-dhuhr, then it is not valid. The speeches would not be valid if they were done before the entrance of dhuhr time, nor would the prayer be valid if it was before the entrance of dhuhr time.
خلافا لما هو مذهب أحمد، عند الإمام أحمد يصح أن يخطب الجمعة قبل دخول وقت الظهر.
As opposed to the madhab of Imam Ahmad, according to Imam Ahmad, it is valid if the speech for the Jumu'ah was done before the entrance of dhuhr time.
شيخنا رحمه الله كان سئل لأهل سويسرا، سألوه في المصلى هناك عندهم يوجد أوقات لأعطال الناس حتى يأتوا للصلاة، فقالوا له في بعض أيام السنة إن انتظرنا دخول الوقت لنبدأ بالخطبة والصلاة تكون انتهت فرص الناس من أعمالهم فلا يأتوا. قال لهم: خذوا بمذهب الإمام أحمد، دعوا بالخطبة قبل دخول وقت الظهر.
Our Shaykh, may Allah have mercy upon him, was asked by some of the people from Switzerland. They said that people there have certain times break from work where they can come for the prayer time and for Jumu'ah, and at different times of the year, if one were to start the speeches and the prayer, and if one were to do the speeches after the entrance of the time of al-dhuhr, this would be outside their time for break. And so many people would not attend the Jumu'ah prayer as a result. So our Shaykh, may Allah have mercy upon him, said to take by the saying of Imam Ahmad that it would be sufficient if the khutbah, the speech of the Friday prayer, was done before the entrance of dhuhr time.
وإيقاعها بإسر الزوال أفضل من تأخيرها، يعني بإسر الزوال عقب الزوال مباشرة أن تقام في هذا الوقت أفضل من تأخيرها لما بعد ذلك، خلافا لصلاة الظهر في الأيام العادية غير الجمعة.
And it is recommended for the Jumu'ah prayer, for the Friday prayer, to be done immediately after the declination of the sun from the center of the sky, as soon as it declines westward from the middle of the sky.
أما الظهر فالأفضل تأخيرها لربع القامة. ربع القامة يعني أليس تكلمنا متى يدخل وقت الظهر؟ إذا مالت الشمس عن وسط السماء، ومتى يخرج إذا صار الظل مثله غير ظل الاستواء. متى يسن أن تصلى الظهر في الجماعات التي في المساجد ونحوها ممن يطلبون غيرهم ليأتي إليهم؟ إذا صار الظل زائد ظل الاستواء ربع القامة، ربع طول الشاخص يعني. نعم.
As opposed to to praying the Dhuhr prayer, it is recommended to pray the Dhuhr prayer when the shadow of the object becomes equal to 1/4 the length of the object plus the shadow at zenith, the zenithal shadow. That is when it would be recommended for the congregational Dhuhr prayer for one to pray the Dhuhr prayer. However, when it comes to Jumu'ah, it is recommended to do the Jumu'ah as soon as the sun declines westward from the middle of the sky.
لأن وقت الظهر قالوا أوقات أعمال فيسن تأخيرها لربع القامة حتى يجتمع الناس من أعمالهم.
They said because the Dhuhr time is the time during which people are engaged with their work, and so they said it is recommended therefore to delay it until the shadow of the object becomes equal to the 1/4 the length of the object in addition to the zenithal shadow, so that they would have time to come to the congregational Dhuhr prayer.
هذا لمن يصلون جماعة ويطلبون غيرهم كالمسجد الذي بابه مفتوح يطلبون أن يأتي الناس. أما من كان يصلي في بيته في عمله ولو كان يصلي جماعة فهذا يسن له أيضا بإثر الزوال لأنه لا ينتظر أحدا.
This is in regards to the situation when there is a mosque, for example, where people are sought to come to attend the congregational prayer, like a mosque that has times when it's open for the congregational prayer. It would be recommended to delay it to this extent, the congregational Dhuhr prayer. However, when it comes to a person praying at his own house, for example, by himself, or he prays at work, for example, even if he prays at work in congregation, it is recommended for him to pray immediately after the sun declines westward from the middle of the sky.
وهذا ليس له دخل بشدة الحر لأنه ورد في الحديث أبردوا في الظهر، معناه عند شدة الحر لا تصلوا الجماعة عند شدة الحر بل انتظروا حتى يبرد الحر قليلا. أما الذي ذكرناه ليس له دخل بالإبراد، إنما هو من أجل أن يجتمع الناس ليصلوا من أعمالهم وأشغالهم. أبردوا في الظهر حديث معناه عند شدة الحر تأخروا قليلا عن أول الزوال في أداء الظهر حتى يكون برد الحر قليلا. لكن هذا شيء آخر عن تأخيرها لما ذكرنا.
In this case pertaining to delaying the congregational Dhuhr prayer by the amount of time that we mentioned is not related to delaying the Dhuhr prayer to a cooler time in cases when there is extreme heat, because it was narrated in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, abridu fi dhuhr, in which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam indicated that in times of extreme heat one should delay the prayer, the time of the Dhuhr prayer, until a time within Dhuhr where the time is cooler. This is a different case from what we are mentioning about delaying the congregational prayer during Dhuhr because of people being engaged with work. Rather, the reason why they said one should delay the prayer for the Dhuhr congregational prayer is so that the people who are engaged in their work would have the opportunity to attend the congregational Dhuhr prayer.
أما الجمعة هم أيضا جماعة يطلبون غيرهم، هي تقام في المسجد والمسجد يؤذن فيه لطلب الناس، ومع هذا قالوا الجمعة لا يسن لهم تأخيرها إلى ربع القامة بل بإثر الزوال، وهذه لأنها تكون مرة ومع الخطبة ليس كالظهر كل يوم.
And as for the Jumu'ah, yes, the Jumu'ah prayer is prayed in congregation, and they do seek others to come pray with them in congregation, and it is prayed in a place in the mosque where the people come to pray. Despite that, they said that the Jumu'ah prayer, it is recommended for Jumu'ah to be conducted immediately after the sun declines westward from the middle of the sky, because the Jumu'ah prayer is done once a week as opposed to the congregational Dhuhr prayer that is done on a daily basis.
ومن شروطها أيضا الإمام ويشترط كونه حرا مقيما. الإمام الذي يخطب للجمعة ويصلي الإماما في الجمعة يشترط كونه حرا فلا تصح إمامة العبد.
The author said, amongst the conditions of the Friday prayer is the Imam, and it is a condition for him to be a free resident. The Imam, the one who gives the speech, and the one who leads the prayer, it is a condition that he would be a free man. So it would not be valid if he was a slave.
وأن يكون مقيما وليس شرطا أن يكون مستوطنا. ذكرنا فرق بين المستوطن والمقيم. يشترط أن يكون مقيما فلا تصح إمامة المسافر ولو كانت تجوز من المسافر وتصح منه وتنعقد وتكفيه عن الجمعة، لكن لا يصح أن يكون إماما. أما المقيم يصح أن يكون إماما في الجمعة.
And it is also a condition that the Imam is a resident, meaning that he is not a traveler. Even if he is not an inhabitant, as long as he is a resident, it would be valid. As long as he is not a traveler. And we spoke previously in the previous lesson about the difference between the inhabitant and the resident. So let that be clear. So even if he is not an inhabitant, but he's a resident, it would be valid from the Imam. However, if he is a traveler, it would not be valid for him to be an Imam. As opposed to those who are travelers and want to pray the Jumu'ah prayer behind the Imam, then it is valid for them to pray the Jumu'ah prayer. It is recommended for them to do so, and it suffices in place of the Dhuhr prayer for the traveler.
وخطبتان قبلها قبل صلاة الجمعة يعني يسمعهما من تنعقد بهم الجمعة.
And amongst the conditions for the Jumu'ah prayer, the Friday prayer, is that there are two speeches conducted before the prayer, heard by those whom the Friday prayer is established through.
من الذين قلنا تنعقد بهم الجمعة على قول 12 سوى الإمام وعلى قول 3 سوى الإمام من المستوطنين غير المقيمين.
Who would the Jumu'ah prayer be established by? We said according to one saying 12, excluding the Imam, and then according to another saying 3, excluding the Imam. And when we say 3 or 12, we're referring to inhabitants.
وشرط الخطبتين كما ذكرنا أن تكونا بعد الزوال بعد دخول وقت الظهر.
And as we mentioned, the condition for the two speeches is that they would be conducted after the entrance of Dhuhr prayer time, that is after the sun declines westward from the middle of the sky.
وقيل بسنية الخطبة الثانية يعني يوجد قول عندهم أن الخطبة واحدة تكفي أما الثانية سنة.
And it was said that the second speech is recommended, meaning according to them there is a saying that the first speech is necessary. As for the second speech, it is not necessary, rather it is recommended.
وأن تصلى جماعة بهم يؤمهم الخطيب. الجمعة لا تصح إلا جماعة لا تصلى فرادى ويشترط أن يؤمهم الخطيب لا يصح أن يخطب أحد ويصلي بالناس أحد آخر.
The author said, in performing the Friday prayer in congregation with those whom the Friday prayer is established, led by the speaker, led by the one who gave the speech. So according to that, it would not be valid for a person to give a speech, to give the speech for the Jumu'ah prayer, and another person to lead them in the prayer.
نعم. سيذكر ذلك. قال ولا تصح بغيره، يعني بغير الخطيب، لا يصح أن يؤمهم غيره إلا لعذر طرأ كجنون الخطيب، يعني إلا لعذر يطرأ على الخطيب كجنونه، خطب ثم جن، فهذا يكون عذر لأن يؤمهم غيره.
And the prayer is not valid without him, meaning it is not valid for other than the one who gave the speech to lead them in the Jumu'ah prayer, except if there was a sudden excuse, like the speaker lost his sanity. If the speaker gave the speech, then something suddenly occurred, he lost his sanity, he became insane, then here this would be an excuse for someone else to lead them in prayer.
وليس من الأعذار أن ينتقض وضوءه. إن انتقض وضوءه ينتظر حتى يتوضأ ويأتي هو يؤم بهم.
And him losing his wudu, the one who gave the speech, losing his wudu is not considered an excuse. Rather, they would wait for him to perform wudu and for him to lead them in prayer.
ووقوعها في مسجد فلا تصح في غير المسجد. أيضا من شرط صحة الجمعة أن تكون في مسجد، لا تصح في البيوت ولا في المصليات ولا في قاعات الأعمال إلا في المسجد.
And performing the Friday prayer in a mosque. Thus it is not valid in other than a mosque. It needs to be performed in a masjid. So it would not be valid according to them to perform the Jumu'ah prayer in places known as musallas, or in different places at work or in one's home. Rather, it must be performed in the masjid.
والمسجد هو الموقوف مسجدا، ليس الذي تعود الناس أن يصلوا فيه من غير أن يوقف مسجدا.
And the masjid is that which was established as an Islamic trust to be a masjid.
وأن لا تقارنها أخرى ببلد واحد، فإن تعددت فالجمعة الصحيحة للجامع القديم أي الذي صليت فيه أولا. أيضا يشترط أن لا تقارنها جمعة أخرى في نفس البلد إلا إن تعذر على الناس أو عسر عليهم أن يجتمعوا في مسجد واحد، فعند ذلك تصح في أكثر من موضع. أما إن كان لا يتعذر على الناس ولا يعسر عليهم أن يجتمعوا في مكان واحد فلا يصح أن يقام جمعتان في بلد. سأكمل عليه.
The author said, and that another Friday prayer is not performed simultaneously with it in the same town. If they were numerous, then the valid Friday prayer is the one performed in the older mosque. This will be explained, inshallah, what is meant by aqdam or older here, inshallah, by the shaykh. And so, according to this, if they were able to gather in one mosque in the town to perform the Jumu'ah prayer, however they have more than one Jumu'ah, then one of them would be valid and the other would not be, with the details that shall be mentioned insha'Allah. However, if they are not able, it is difficult for them to all gather in one mosque in the town, then it would be valid for them to have more than one Jumu'ah in the town according to the need.
إذا شق، يعني كان يوجد مشقة على الناس أن يجتمعوا في مكان واحد، عند ذلك يجوز تعددها. ليس شرطا أن يكون لا يمكن إقامتها، إنما يمكن في مكان واحد لكن يشق على الناس، عند ذلك يجوز تعددها.
if it is difficult upon them to have the Jumu'ah prayer in one place in the town, in one mosque in the town, then here it is permissible for them to have, it would be valid for them to have more than one Jumu'ah in the town. It's not necessarily a condition that they are unable to have the prayer in one place, even if they were able to, but it was accompanied by a difficulty to have everyone pray in one mosque, then according to this it would be valid for them to pray in more than one mosque.
أحيانا قد يكون هذا لسعة البلد، يكون من أراد أن يأتي من طرفها إلى مكانها يأخذ عليه نصف النهار مثلا مشيا، أو يكون الناس من حيث الكثرة ما عاد يسعهم بناء واحد مبني، وإذا أرادوا أن يصلوا في الطرقات في الخارج هذا يشق عليهم. عند هذا تصح للسابقة والمسبوقة، يصح تعددها.
And sometimes it would be difficult for them to have only one Jumu'ah in the town because sometimes the town is very wide and very vast. So some people, it might take them such a long amount of time to reach the place of Jumu'ah if they were to walk. Some of them, it might take them half a day walking, although it's within the same town. But because of the vastness of this town, it would take them half a day to attend that Jumu'ah, where the Jumu'ah is located. Or perhaps due to the large number of people, a mosque that is built, maybe not everybody is able to fit within the perimeter of the building of the mosque, so people would then have to pray outside on the streets and in the pathways, and this would be difficult upon them. So here it would be permissible for them to have more than one Jumu'ah, and so the former and the latter would be valid.
فإن لم يكن الأمر كذلك، كانوا في قرية يمكن اجتماعهم في مكان واحد لإقامة الجمعة، فلا يجوز تعددها، فإن تعددت فالجمعة الصحيحة هي للجامع القديم. ما المراد بالجامع القديم؟ الذي أقيمت فيه أولا، وليس الذي بني أولا. قد يكون بني واحد ثم بني الثاني بعده بسنة ثم بدأت الجمعة، فإن بدأت الجمعة في الثاني فالجمعة له دائما ولو كان بناؤه متأخرا عن الأول.
However, if the situation was not like that, rather they were in a small town where they were able to gather in one place for Jumu'ah without difficulty, without hardship, then if there are two Jumu'ahs that are performed in this small town, then literally the older mosque would be valid and the latter would be invalid. What is meant here by older, which is a literal translation, is that the mosque in which the prayer starts first.
الجمعة ليس الصلاة، الذي أقيمت فيه جمعة أولا وليس صلاة.
The mosque in which the Jumu'ah, not necessarily the prayer itself, but the Jumu'ah started earlier, then that is what is considered the older mosque. It is the former. And the one that started afterwards is invalid. And so older here does not refer to when it was built. So if there was a mosque that was built and then a year later there was a second mosque that was built, so this mosque that was built after the first mosque, if this second mosque, the Jumu'ah, started in it before that older mosque, then this is the mosque that has the valid Jumu'ah. So here the way it's translated is a literal translation, so pay attention to that.
ليس المراد في يومه، يعني من صلى الجمعة في هذا اليوم أولا، لا، إنما ما هو المسجد الذي بدأ يصلى فيه الجمعة أولا، فالجمعة دائما له، ولو كان الجامع الذي الآخر في هذا اليوم سبقه لهذا. لمن الجمعة؟ للذي بدأت فيه الجمعة أولا، ليس في يومه كل يوم بيومه.
So perhaps what I said was misleading. So we'll correct this inshallah. So the Shaykh said that the older mosque, what is meant here, is the mosque where the Jumu'ah was established first. Not necessarily in this day, but which mosque had Jumu'ah established in it first. So this mosque always has the priority. Even if on a specific day, this mosque, they prayed their Jumu'ah prayer later, it still has the priority, and this is the Jumu'ah that is valid. So if I said something that contradicts this or misleading, then please correct it based on what we mentioned right now.
المسجد الذي بدأ المسلمون أهل تلك البلدة يصلون فيه الجمعة أولا، الجمعة دائما له طالما البلدة تسع الناس في مكان واحد، ولو سبقه غيره الجمعة لهؤلاء ولو كانوا متأخرين.
So again, the case is that the mosque in that town that was built by the people, that mosque in which the Jum'ah was established first, that mosque will have the priority when it comes to having more than one Jumu'ahs without an excuse in the town. That Jumu'ah would be, that mosque where the Jumu'ah is established first would have the valid Jumu'ah. Even if on a specific day, the prayer was prayed afterwards in that mosque. But since the Jumu'ah prayer in that mosque was established before Jumu'ah prayers in other mosques in that village or that town, this mosque will have the priority. So it would be valid, and the other Jumu'ahs in the town would not be valid, again, if there was no reason for having more than one Jumu'ah in the town.
الذين بدأوا الجمعة في المدينة لهم الأولوية، هم بدأوا بها، فعلى البقية أن يلحقوهم في هذه المرة التي بدأوا بها وفيما بعدها، إلا إذا اتفق أهل القرية على نقل الجمعة من مكان إلى مكان أكبر منه مثلا أو أوسط منه بين البيوت. إن اتفقوا على ذلك فتنتقل وتصير لهذا الجديد دائما أيضا لا تصح بغيره.
Because the ones who first established the Jumu'ah in the town, this place where it was first established will always have the priority in which one is considered valid, unless the people of the town agreed to move the place of Jumu'ah. For example, the people of that town agreed that the Jumu'ah would now be in a larger place, in a larger mosque. So now the place of Jumu'ah that has priority is that larger mosque that they agreed to move the Jumu'ah to. Or if they maybe agreed to move it to a place that is more central within the town, then that place that they agreed where it would be moved to now has the priority. So the others would need to follow them and pray in that mosque.
وأقل الخطبة ما يسمى خطبة عند العرب وهو المشهور.
And the minimum speech is that which is called a speech or named a speech according to the Arabs. And this is the famous saying.
يعني في المشهور لا يوجد تحديد أنه شرط أن يقول آية فيه وشرط أن يذكر فيه لفظ الحمدلله. ما يسمى عند العرب خطبة هذا يكفي. هذا هو المشهور.
So according to the famous, the more widespread saying in the school, that whatever is considered a speech, according to the Arabs, then this is what is valid for the Jumu'ah. And so according to the famous saying, they do not make it a condition to recite an ayah in the first or the second speech, or to necessarily say Alhamdulillah or As-Salat ala Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
فإن فعل الخطيب ذلك يعني نصح الحاضرين بأشياء، حذرهم من أشياء، نهاهم عن أشياء، نصحهم بأشياء فيها خير، ولو لم يذكر آية ولو لم يذكر الحمد لله، إنما ذكر حديثا فيه خير لهم، يكفي ذلك.
And so according to this, if the one who was giving the speech, he commanded them with commands and prohibited them from certain prohibitions, and he advised them, he admonished them, and he warned them, even if he did not recite an ayah of the Quran, then this would be sufficient.
وقيل أقلها حمد الله وصلاة وسلام على رسول الله وتحذير وتبشير.
And it was said that its minimum is Alhamdulillah, saying Alhamdulillah, and As-salatu ala nabi was-salam upon the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and giving warnings as well as glad tidings or good tidings.
وقرآن يتلى أي في الأولى.
And Quranic recitation, that is in the first speech.
ودعاء في إحداهما.
And supplication in one of the two speeches.
واستحب أن يكون أي الدعاء في الثانية ليقابل الآية في الأولى.
And the supplication is recommended to be in the second speech to correspond with the verse that was done in the first speech.
ولو دعا في الأولى وحدها ولم يدعو في الثانية صح.
Although if he were to have made dua in the first speech and he did not make dua supplication in the second speech, it would still be valid.
وفي وجوب الطهارة للخطبتين قولان. المشهور عدم الوجوب.
And concerning the obligation of purification as a condition for the two speeches, there are two sayings. The famous saying is that it is not obligatory.
فلو خطب الخطيب محدثا ثم أنهى الخطبة وذهب توضأ ليصلي بالناس ما عليه بأس.
And so if the person were to have given a speech, if he gave the speech without being upon purification, and then after the speech was completed, he went to perform al-wudu to lead them in prayer, then this would be valid.
لكن يكره ذلك، يكره أن يخطب الخطيب محدثا.
However, it is disliked for the speech to be given while in a state of ritual impurity.
ويشترط ستر العورة.
And it is a condition to cover the unlawful nakedness.
هذا للخطيب، الكلام عن الخطيب.
And we are speaking about the one who is giving the speech.
واختلف في وجوب القيام لهما للخطبتين والمشهور الوجوب.
And the scholars differed concerning the obligation of standing for the two speeches. The famous saying is that it is obligatory.
يعني معناه ولو خطب محدثا على خلاف ولو خطب جالسا ليس قائما على خلاف المشهور صحت خطبته.
That means if he were to have given the speeches while he was sitting as opposed to standing, then this would be valid according to the saying that is less famous in the school.
والجلوس بينهما والمشهور السنية، يعني اختلف في الجلوس أيضا بين الخطبتين، هل يجب عليه أن يجلس ثم يقوم فيبدأ بالثانية أو لا يجب؟ المشهور أنه لا يجب بل يسن.
Also sitting between the two speeches, and the famous saying is that it is recommended. So there's also a difference here regarding the sitting between the two speeches. The sitting between the two speeches, according to the famous saying within the school, is an obligation, is recommended. And according to another saying within the school, it is an obligation.
فلو أنهى الأولى وسكت وبقي واقفا ثم بدأ بالثانية حمد الله وصلى على النبي وذكر آية مثلا في الثانية كما هو مستحب صح ذلك ولو لم يجلس.
So if he started the first khutbah and then he completed the first speech and he stood standing without sitting, he remained silent for a short period of time, and then he started the second khutbah with the other conditions that we mentioned, even though he did not sit, according to the famous saying, it would be valid.
ويشترط الموالاة بينهما وبين الصلاة.
And it is a condition to observe continuity between the two speeches and the prayer.
نعم قد ينتقد وضوء الإمام فينتظرونه، هذا عفو يعذرون بذلك.
Yes, perhaps the one who gave the speech broke his wudu, so they need to wait, or was not on the state of wudu, so they needed to wait for him to make wudu before praying. This amount of time during which he would perform wudu is excused.
وإلا لغير هذا شرط أن ينهي الخطبتين ويبدأ بالصلاة من غير فاصل طويل.
Or else, other than this case, it is a condition that once the two speeches are completed, they start praying the Jumu'ah prayer without a lengthy interruption.
ويسن الغسل لها ويكون متصلا بالذهاب إليها لا بعد الفجر مثلا. يسن لمن حضر الجمعة ولو لم تكن واجبة عليه يسن له الغسل.
And it is recommended for the one who attends the Jumu'ah to perform a ghusl. And this ghusl should be coupled with going to the Jumu'ah, to the place of Jumu'ah. Meaning it would not be sufficient according to them for one to make the ghusl when Fajr comes in and then there's a long amount of time that lapses until they actually start going to the place of Jumu'ah. Rather, the ghusl being performed and then going to the place of Jumu'ah should be coupled. Yani they should be done after the other.
لكل من حضرها ولو لم تكن واجبة عليه.
And it is recommended for whoever attends the Jumu'ah to perform the ghusl, even if this person was not obligated to perform the Jumu'ah.
هذا الغسل لأن هذا الغسل لها وليس لليوم كما يوم العيد. غسل العيد يسن لليوم، يعني لمن يذهب لصلاة العيد ولمن لا يذهب لصلاة العيد يسن له الغسل. أما غسل الجمعة فهو لها وليس ليومها، فهو سنة لمن حضرها.
Because this ghusl that is recommended is for the one who attends the Friday prayer, and it is not for the day of Friday itself. So it'd be specific to those who attend the Friday prayer, as opposed to the ghusl, the recommended ghusl that one performs for Eid. That ghusl is done for the day itself. So even if someone were to not attend the Eid prayer, it is still recommended for this person to perform the ghusl for the day of Eid.
ويندب أن يتجمل لها بنحو ثياب نظيفة واستعمال طيب وقص الأظافر.
And it is recommended for him to beautify himself for the Jumu'ah prayer,
كتنظيف نفسه كالغسل،
such as cleaning himself with
يلبس ثياب نظيفة
and wearing clean clothing,
وضع الطيب،
as well as using perfume and cutting the nails.
نعم. ويحرم بعد الأذان التشاغل عنها.
And it is forbidden for one after the adhan for one to be distracted from the Jumu'ah
ببيع وشراء وإجارة وما سوى ذلك من العقود.
to be distracted from the Jumu'ah by engaging in buying or selling or rental agreements, as well as other contracts and transactions.
والحرمة تبدأ بمجرد البدء بالأذان لها وليس بالانتهاء.
And the forbiddenness begins by the initiation of the adhan, not by the completion of the adhan for Jumu'ah.
بمجرد بدء الأذان يحرم تعاطي كل المعاملات التي فيها تشاغل عنها.
By the mere initiation of the adhan for Jumu'ah, it becomes forbidden for them to engage in any transaction that would distract them from the Jumu'ah prayer.
وينتهي المنع بانتهاء الصلاة وليس بانتهاء الخطبتين.
And the prohibition ends by the completion of the prayers, by the completion of the prayer of Jumu'ah, not by the completion of the two speeches.
أما ما لا يشغل عنها كأن كان ذاهبا إليها فوجد شخصا معه سيارة أيضا ذاهب إليها، فقال له استأجره ليوصله بالأجرة، فيجوز ذلك لأن ذلك لا يشغل عنها، هو ذاهب على أي حال.
As for the transaction that does not distract the person from the attendance of Jumu'ah, for example, if a person was going to the place of Jumu'ah and then he saw someone who was in his car who is also going to the place of Jumu'ah, who is also going to perform the Jumu'ah prayer, so he hires this person to take him to the place of Jumu'ah for a set amount of money, then this transaction does not distract him from the Jumu'ah prayer, and this would be permissible.
طيب قلنا البيع ونحوه لا يجوز، فإن حصل البيع بعد الأذان يجب فسخ هذا البيع.
And so if we said that the selling and buying would not be permissible, that distracts the person from Jumu'ah would not be permissible after the initiation of the adhan for Jumu'ah. So what if a sale were to occur during this time when it is forbidden? It is obligatory to cancel the sale.
معنى ذلك أنه البيع بعد الأذان حرام لكن يصح. لما قالوا يجب فسخه معناه صح، لكن يجب فسخه، لأنه الحرمة أحيانا حرمة المعاملات، أحيانا تكون الحرمة بالفعل، لكن مع هذا يصح الفعل.
And the meaning of that, when we say that it's forbidden, however, and that this person, if they were to have engaged in a transaction, this transaction must be cancelled, is that this transaction, although it was sinful, it is a valid transaction. It is valid, however, it is sinful, and it is an obligation upon them to cancel this transaction that they engaged in. So sometimes in the dealings and the transaction sometimes would be valid, but it would be sinful at the same time.
بعض المعاملات يقال حرام بمعنى لا يجوز فعلها ولا يصح، وبعضها يقال حرام لكن صح العقد، يعني انتقلت الملكية للاثنين لكن الفعل هما حرام.
Some transactions we would say this transaction is forbidden, and we mean by that it's sinful and invalid. And sometimes we would say that a transaction is forbidden, and what we mean is that it is valid but it is sinful. It is sinful, yet it is still valid. What does it mean when we say it is still valid? That means the transfer of ownership occurred between the two parties. For example, with selling and buying, the transfer of ownership occurred between the two parties. However, this doing in itself was a sinful action.
نعم. أذان دخول الوقت.
When there's a question, when we say the adhan for Jumu'ah, what is meant? The first or second adhan? What is meant is the entrance of the time. The adhan that is done for the entrance of the time.
فسخ معناه يرد المبيع لصاحبه والمال لصاحبه.
When we say that transaction, that sale would be cancelled if it were to occur during this forbidden time, that means that the item that was sold goes back to the owner, the original owner, and the money that was given goes back to the buyer.
قالوا إلا إذا فات ما عاد يمكن الرد فيرجع بالقيمة يوم القبض. يعني إذا كان اشترى شخص شيئا من شخص بعد الأذان الثاني وقبضه ودفع المال، قلنا عليهما حرمة كلاهما ويجب عليهما الرد. إذا كان هذا الذي اشتراه الشخص ما عاد بيده، فات ما عاد بيده، كأن باعه صار بيد آخر، أو طعاما أكله، ماذا يفعل؟ يرجع بالقيمة يوم القبض. متى ما قبض، أي في الوقت الذي قبض فيه المبيع، كم كانت قيمته، عليه أن يغرم هذه القيمة. بعد أذان دخول الوقت. نعم. لا.
So what if the sale were to occur during this time of forbiddenness after the adhan for Jumu'ah occurred? And it's not a condition that it is after the second adhan, as we mentioned, by the adhan by which the time enters. That's when the forbiddenness were to occur. If this item that was sold, if the person, for example, is no longer able to return it back, we said that they're obligated to cancel this transaction. If the person is not able to return this item back because, for example, he sold it to someone else, or he might have consumed this item, the item that he bought was an item of food that one consumed, so he already consumed it, then what does he do in this case? He would return the value that it equaled at the time that they exchanged the items.
وهذا ليس شرطا أن يكون قيمة العقد، قد يكون لما باعه بأرخص من قيمته أو باعه بأغلى من قيمته، فيوجد فرق بين قيمة العقد والقيمة عند القبض. القيمة التي كانت عند العقد ليس شرطا أن تكون هي القيمة عند القبض حقيقة.
And here when we say he returns back the value at the time of exchange, what is meant is
قيمة الذي قبضه قيمته وقت القبض، لأنه أيضا القيمة قد تختلف من يوم لآخر. قيمته يوم القبض كم كانت، هذا الذي يرده.
He returns the value that it was at the time of exchange.
نعم. في العقود البيع والشراء أحيانا ينظر للقيمة عند العقد، يعني كم كان لفظ البيع، كم كان بعتك هذا القلم بدولار مثلا، عند العقد قيمته دولار، ليس عند العقد، في العقد، في لفظ العقد بعتك هذا بدولار، لكن حقيقة قد يكون قيمته نصف دولار وقد يكون قيمته 10 دولارات. فيوم ليس المراد برد القيمة إن فات القيمة التي كانت عند العقد في لفظ العقد، بل القيمة يوم قبضه كانت قيمته 10 دولارات، ولو أنا بعته بدولار واحد إن فات ولم يستطع رده لي، يرد لي قيمته يوم قبضه التي هي 10 دولارات. ففي فرق بين القيمة في العقد والقيمة يوم العقد والقيمة يوم القبض، هي ثلاث قيم مختلفة، قد تكون مختلفة.
So with the transactions, there are different values that one might look at in general. There is the value that is agreed upon in the transaction. For example, someone might agree to sell you a pen for $1. This is the value in the transaction, as opposed to the real value of this pen, or on that day could have been $10. The value of the pen that day could have been $10. But the value within the transaction that was agreed upon was $1. So when we talk about returning the value back, he wouldn't return the mere value that was agreed upon within the transaction. Rather, he would return the value of this item that it had on that day. So if the value of that item on that day was $10, he would return $10, even if when they did the transaction, they exchanged it for $1.
هو عليه أن يرد المبيع، لأنه قلنا يجب فسخ العقد، عليه أن يرد المبيع. إن كان المبيع ما عاد معه يرد قيمته. أي قيمة؟ قيمة العقد، أو القيمة التي كانت يوم العقد، أو القيمة التي كانت يوم القبض. القيمة التي كانت يوم القبض هذه التي يردها.
He
ترجم هذا ثم.
So there are again 3 values that one might look at when it comes to transactions. There's the value of the item on the day of the transaction, and there's the value of the item within the transaction, and there's the value of the item at the exchange. So what does he return?
المبيع يوم القبض وليس يوم العقد وليس الذي كان في العقد.
He returns the value of the item, the day, the value of the item based on the day it was exchanged. So the day that it was exchanged, not necessarily the day that the contract was made, but the day that the item was exchanged, what was the value of this item on that day? He would return this amount. And again, he would not return the amount that was agreed upon in the transaction per se, necessarily, nor would he return the value of that item on the day of the transaction. Rather, he would return the value of that item when the exchange occurred. Hope this is clear.
هي فقط نعيد هذه الأمور الثلاثة. يوجد قيمة عند العقد، قيمة العقد، ويوجد قيمة المبيع عند العقد وليس في فعل العقد، ويوجد قيمة يوم القبض، وهذه القيم قد تكون مختلفة. كما ذكرنا، لو مثلا عندك سيارة قيمتها $1000، فأنت وتذهب مع صديقك إلى الجمعة قلت له بعتك هذه السيارة $500، بدك تتوصفي، قلت له ب500 وهي قيمتها 1000، فقيمة العقد كم؟ 500. القيمة الفعلية للسيارة 1000، لكن هو ما أقبضته إياها فورا، أقبضته إياها بعد شهر استلمها، فصارت قيمتها 2000. فلما يفسخ العقد كم الذي عليه أن يرده إن لم تكن السيارة موجودة؟ هو الأصل أن يرد السيارة وترد له المال. هذا معنى يفسخ ويرد المبيع. إن كانت لم تعد موجودة باعها لشخص آخر، كم عليه أن يرد؟ القيمة يوم القبض. يوم قبضها كانت قيمتها 2000، بده يرد 2000، مش ال500 بس اللي اشترى فيها.
Inshallah, I'll do my best to translate that. So there are different values when it comes to the transactions. There's the value of the transaction, the value that was agreed upon in the transaction itself. There's another value, which is the value of the article at the time of the transaction. What was the value of this article when that transaction was made? And this is different. This could be different than the value that is agreed upon in the transaction itself. And there's a third value, which is what is the value of the article at the time of the exchange, the value of that article at the time of the exchange. So if someone was, for example, going to Jumu'ah prayer and he engaged in a transaction after the time entered, and he saw his friend, and his friend said to him, I will sell you my car for $500. In reality, the value of that car on that day was $1,000, for example. He sold it to his friend for $500. So he bought it for $500 from his friend because his friend wanted to make it easier on him. So he did so. Although the value of the car in reality on that day was $1,000, the transaction was done for $500. So this is the value of the transaction. Although the value of this article, which is the car, that day was $1,000. Now, say that the exchange didn't occur on that day. The transaction was already established. And we said the value of the transaction was $500. But then the exchange occurred a month later. And a month
لم يسلمه السيارة فورا، سلمه إياها بعد شهر.
He did not
بعد شهر تغيرت قيمتها، صارت 2000.
He did not give him the car immediately, rather he gave him the car a month later after the transaction was established. And after a month, the car's value was no longer $1,000. The value of the car is now $2,000. So when it comes to this transaction that needs to be canceled, originally he would have given him back the car and those $500 would be returned back to the buyer. But if the car is no longer available, then what does he return? He returns the value of the car at the time of the exchange, at the time when the car was handed over to him, which was $2,000.
يعني هو يسترد من البائع $500 ويعطي البائع يسترد منه $500 لكن يعطيه 2000 بدل السيارة لأن قيمتها يوم قبضها كانت وصلت إلى 2000.
So the seller would give the buyer $500 because that's what he took from him. And the car that he's unable to actually give back any longer, he gives back the value of that car based on the day that the car was handed over to him, which is $2,000.
وقد يكون العكس يعني ليس دائما ترتفع الأسعار قد تكون انخفضت فيرد له وقت قيمتها وقت قبضها.
And again, it doesn't necessarily mean that the price of the exchange, that the value of this article when the item was handed over, when he took possession of the item, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's always higher than the actual value that was agreed upon in the transaction. It might also be lower.
هذا ما يتعلق بالجمعة لكن دخلنا فيه في موضوع المعاملات يكون عينة على المعاملات لتتحمسوا أن تتعلموا المعاملات أيضا وهو متعلق بالجمعة هذا.
So this is, we were speaking about what pertains to the Jumu'ah, but we digressed into speaking about details pertaining to the transactions so that inshallah you would be motivated to continue learning and learn the chapter of the transactions as well.
وسبحان الله والحمد لله رب العالمين والله سبحانه وتعالى أعلم. نعم نعم هو إن حصل التقابض نعم وقد نعم بعد ذلك معناه ما تعلم المسألة مثلا إلا بعد شهر وكان بعد شهر قبض السيارة يفسخ مع هذا لكن إن كانت السيارة موجودة يردها وهو يرد المال إن لم تكن موجودة لا يحصل نزاع كم قيمتها هل أنا بعتك برخيص فترد لي فقط الرخيص الذي بعتك به إنما يرد له القيمة هو رضي أن يبيعها بهذا الثمن ودخلت بملكه بمجرد العقد الآن ليست موجودة أي قيمة يرد قيمتها يوم قبضها.
So this was explained previously.
لا من حيث حرمة الأكل البيع حرام لكن الملك دخل في ملكه فلا يكون أكل حراما دخل في ملكه.
There's a question about what if someone bought food during this time of prohibition when after the time of Jumu'ah has entered, the adhan for Jumu'ah was made. Is it forbidden for him to eat this food that he bought? The answer is that this food that he bought, since the transaction is valid but with a sin, that food is now in his property, is now under his ownership. So if he eats this food, eating the food itself that he bought in this forbidden yet valid transaction, eating this food is not sinful. It's permissible for him to eat the food, but as we said, the transaction itself was sinful.
هذا الفرق بين البيع الذي يصح ويحرم وبين البيع الذي يحرم ولا يصح. هذا يحرم لكن يصح.
This is the difference between the transaction that is valid and forbidden and between the transaction that is invalid and forbidden. So this transaction that we are discussing about the one who engages in such transactions during the time of Jumu'ah, this is valid yet sinful.
ما شاء الله فتحت النفوس على المعاملات. نعم. بهذا الذي ذكرناه بعد الأذان يحرم البيع والشراء للمرأة لا يحرم على الذي تجب عليه أما من لا تجب عليه لا يحرم لكن مرأة تبيع مرأة لا تبيع رجل واجب عليه الجمعة.
So this prohibition pertains to those who are obligated to attend the Jumu'ah. It would not pertain to the woman. So the woman can sell to another woman, for example, during this time, but she cannot sell to a man who is obligated to attend the Jumu'ah, for example.
تفضل. في المذهب المالكي لا يذكرون، ما مر معي أقوال أخرى عندهم.
So a question about, they mentioned that the conditions, among the conditions for the Jumu'ah is for the Jumu'ah to be performed in a mosque and for the Imam to be a resident. So the brother was asking if there are other sayings. So Shaykh Muhammad said he hasn't heard of other sayings pertaining to these
لكن
matters.
مقيم ليس معناه مستوطن. مقيم، عرفتم معنى المقيم. تفضل. لابد أن تكون أركانها في اللغة العربية. لا يذكرون إلا العربية في أمر العبادات، حتى في الصلاة أمر مهم يعني ينبغي أن تعرفوه، وهو أنه لا يجوز أن يدعو الشخص في الصلاة بغير العربية، إلا استثنوا من ذلك ما كان ترجمة للمأثور، للأدعية المأثورة، وإلا إن دعا في صلاته بغير العربية فسدت صلاته إن كان بغير المأثور. يعني في العبادات يشددون على أن تكون أفعالها في العربية.
So the brother asked about the Jumu'ah, the speech, can the speech be done in English? The Shaykh said the integrals of the speech need to be done in Arabic. And he mentioned, he draws our attention to that in the worships. They mentioned that, for example, in the prayer, one cannot make dua in English, rather, except if he is translating the dua, the ad'iyah, the supplications that were narrated from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is an exception. However, other than this, if one were to make dua in English in the prayer, his prayer would be invalidated.
أما خارج الصلاة يدعو بما شاء، والخطبتين من العبادات أيضا.
As for outside the prayer, he can make dua in English for whatever he wants. That is in accordance to the religion. As for the two speeches are amongst the worships.
نعم. واحد. العقد هو المحرم، التقابض تبع للعقد. الآن الثاني. $2000 أو 200. نعم. برد 500.
So there's a question about what is forbidden during this time of prohibition after the time of Jum'ah, the adhan was made. When it comes to engaging the transactions, is the engaging the transaction itself, the contract, what is forbidden, or is the exchange forbidden? The contract itself is forbidden, and the Shaykh said that the exchange follows the contract.
تبع للعقد. نعم. تغير السوق، سعر المثل ينظر، يعني كلاهما يعرف مثل هذه في العادة كم يكون، إن اختلفا يجلبا خبراء يقررا بينهم.
When it comes to knowing the market value, for example, of something, if they, sometimes it's known what the market value of this item was, but if they differ about it, then they bring an expert a specialist pertaining to this matter, and he would inform them what the market value was at that time.
تفضل. هذا فيه خلافات كثيرة، نعم، لكن هو هكذا الغالب على هذا. أذان دخول الوقت سميته أول أو ثاني، لكن هو أذان دخول الوقت، ليس الأذان الذي يجلس فيه الخطيب على المنبر عند جلوسه، بل الأذان الذي يكون عند دخول الوقت. نعم. ليس وقت الغرامة بل وقت القبض، لما قبض المبيع قد ايه كانت قيمته، قد تكون تغيرت وقد تكون هي ما زالت، لكن إن كانت تغيرت فالعبرة بالقيمة يوم القبض وليس يوم العقد، ولو انخفضت. نعم نعم. لا، عندهم لابد من ما يكون فيه يعتبر خطبة عند العرب، لابد أن يذكر شيئا لهم ينصحهم به، يحذرهم منه، يعلمهم إياه، هذا يسمى خطبة عند العرب. تلك مقدمات، حمد الله والصلاة والسلام على رسوله، مقدمات لما سيذكره. بعضهم يجعلها سنة، الذي قال أقلها ما يسمى خطبة عند العرب من غير اشتراط هذا، نعم، لكن بعضهم اشترط هذا. الدعاء ذكرناه. الدعاء نعم، هذا كما هو عند الشافعية، يعني إن من شرطه هو كما هو عند الشافعية.
Most of the questions asked, I think, were addressed in the lesson, but just one thing, the du'at that some of the Malikis say must be done in the speech, it's similar to what the Shafi'i say about the
قرب وقت الجمعة، ما هيك؟
for the Jumu'ah.
طيب، بارك الله فيكم. قرب وقت الجمعة اللي عم نحكي عنها. تفضل حاج. ما سمعت. عم تسمع انت؟
ما عم بسمع.
إذا دعا بالإنجليزي بالصلاة تبطل الصلاة، إلا إن كان قال الشيخ يوجد قول أن من دعا بالأعجمية أيضا، هو قال أولا من دعا بغير العربية تبطل صلاته إلا إن كان ترجمة للمأثور. فقلنا له يوجد أناس أسلموا مثلا ولا يعرفون العربية ومضى عليهم سنين وهم يدعون بلغتهم، فلم يجب فورا. في يوم الثاني قال لنا يوجد عند البعض من قال إن صلاتهم لا تبطل. فعلى هذا يكون يعني.
نعم. There's a question about the one who makes dua in the prayer
عن الأعجمية حتى يعني، والعامية تتبع.
If a person made dua in the prayer in a language other than English, we spoke in a language other than Arabic. We spoke about this already, that what is mentioned, Sheikh Muhammad Bakri says when they took this from the Sheikh, he mentioned to them what was mentioned